All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back. This is Strange Planet Podcast. And for this week's episode, should Trump be on the ballot? All right, so I guess in recent news here, I was going to say there's a handful of states that are basically, they want to take Trump off the ballot because of the insurrection. Now, here, there's lots of different ways to look at this. There's a lot of people that kind of, just say, don't do that and let's beat them the original way and take them out, the old fashioned way. The flip side of that, I mean, this is the way I feel, and you guys can chime in and let me know what you guys think too here. But I almost feel like if he is guilty of it, which, I mean, let's be serious here, it seems pretty freaking obvious that he orchestrated this entire, insurrection on January 6th. He should be taken off the ballot because that's what the Constitution says. So it's not a matter of whether or not, that you like him because of that failed Apprentice or Monday Night Raw or whatever. If he is guilty of that, then I kind of feel like he shouldn't be on the ballot because that's the Constitution. Otherwise, what are we doing? What is the law? You know what I mean? What do you guys think?
All right. I'll chime in on this real quick. I think with the whole concept of, we'll beat him, in the polls and everything, they did that last year or the last election, and we beat him. So, and he didn't want to go away.
And he had trouble admitting it too.
No, he's still admitting it. It's ridiculous. So, but getting onto the legality of it all, he absolutely should not even be on the ballot. I mean, he decided to announce his candidacy for presidency again earlier than anyone because then he could hopefully dodge all these, indictments that he's facing. So this wasn't, he wanted to become president, even though he did want to become president. This was a move to try to skirt all the crimes he's being accountable for now. Yeah,
I mean, I hear you. And that's the way I kind of see it too. Realistic standpoint here.
Well, Trump is, I think he would have ran for the presidency regardless of whether he was in legal trouble or not. You got to remember, he's a very thin-skinned and vindictive man, and losing the presidency and that power probably just solidified his decision to run again. He wasn't going to leave on losing terms. He wants back in. He wants that power again. As far as whether he should be left off the ballot, that's definitely an interesting question, both from a legal and political standpoint. So legally, this is an undecided question, and it's probably going to head to the Supreme Court at some point. As of now, I think we have 3 court rulings, mainly from Colorado and Maine, and then I think there was another one, but
and there'll be more, I'm sure.
But yeah, there's definitely states interested in removing him from both the primary ballot and the general election ballot. Now, and interestingly enough, I think that legally there's a pretty strong argument that at least for the primary ballot, Trump should be allowed to run if the Republican Party wants him on the ballot. The primary is not really an official election. It may be governed by state laws and organized by the state or with cooperation from the state or under regulation of the state. But it's really a private organization, aka the Republican Party's contest to see who gets to lead that organization. And so what we're asking the Supreme Court to do is to step in and say, hey, private organization, you can't choose your leader. Now, when it comes to an official federal election, then there's a case to be made that, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment would bar Trump from holding office because he fomented an insurrection. Now, whether or not that is legally permissible, again, is up to the Supreme Court. I think it's pretty clear that this is an issue that the Supreme Court definitely needs to hear, because states are actually taking action and removing him from the ballot. It's a controversy that is ripe for consideration. But so far, the Supreme Court, it hasn't gotten to that level yet. Now, I don't know that politically it would be a great idea to push this. Obviously, preventing Trump from attaining the presidency again is top priority by any legal means necessary. However, there could be sort of a backlash in terms of Trump supporters seeing that he was treated unfairly. Trump will whine, saying that he was treated unfairly. And this time, he would actually have somewhat of a point in that, he's not allowed to run. He's not allowed to be considered on the ballot. And so before he was bitching about it's rigged against him, even, when he won, he bitched about it. When he lost, he said it was rigged against him. But now, hey, it's, he's actually being prevented from running. So I think that could give him ammunition, but at the same time, getting him off the ballot is a primary consideration.
Right. But I almost feel like if, obviously if it is what we're seeing here and he is guilty of the insurrection, then we should be upholding the Constitution. I mean, it's not about whether his fans are okay with it or not. It's about what he did. You know what I mean? So that's the only reason why I kind of feel like, sure, maybe politically it's not, because it's going to draw attention and then the followers are going to, try to riot or whatever the case is. But the saddest part about it is it's almost like Trump isn't even the biggest threat in this department, because I'm more worried if we let him squeak through this and say, he ends up being on it regardless to whether, he's guilty of it or not, or even if he is and somehow he's still on the ballot, say, what's going to happen 10, 20 years from now when someone else is taking detailed notes of all this and decides to manipulate the system just the same way that he did, thinking that it's going to work the same way for him as well. So I feel like this is setting a standard that we haven't really seen before. We've never been in this kind of situation before. So it's very important. I feel like we handle this correctly. So when it happens again, which I'm willing to bet it will, history's got a very good, notion of repeating itself. We'll be ready for it. You know what I mean?
All right. I have to chime in here real quick because I disagree with the fact that he should be given the chance. When the forefathers of this country were writing the Constitution and setting the standard for what the country will be going forward, they didn't want the United States to fall into a dictatorship or a totalitarian government. And that's kind of why they had the provision in the Constitution in the first place. Because if someone was elected president and decided that, hey, I don't want to leave being president, I'm just going to have a coup or January 6th, the insurrection. I'm going to have an insurrection and I'm going to still be president. So, I feel like people have a short memory where that didn't happen, because it did.
I agree.
We all watched it happen. There may be things that no one's telling us that could make this go the other way. But from what I've seen on regular, everyday television, in the news and the media, that's what I see. I saw that, he got up there on January 6th. He riled up all his people just down the street from the government building. And he's like, all right, let's go march. I'll be there with you. And
right.
It's just like, really?
And there was nothing peaceful about it. So let's make sure that bullshit gets aired out now too, because if you saw the same footage that we saw, which I'm pretty sure you did, that was definitely like not only circusy, but unfortunately, people have even died that day. So there was nothing peaceful about that. You know what I mean? And there's no
Right,
denying that it was egged on by him either.
I was going to say, do you remember, I guess like a year or two before that, when we had a peaceful protest in front of the White House, they gassed the shit out of the people. So Mr. Clown could walk across the street with a Bible to hold it upside down.
I do remember that too.
So, I mean, at what point does the silliness of it all show it for what it really is? Because all he does is deny, deflect.
Basically,
and that's
he's
what
always
makes
the
this
victim.
whole thing. That's what muddies this whole thing, is because there's no, concrete way to say that it happened, because we have to have, go through courts and laws and this and that. And I'm just hoping that even though the deck is stacked in the Supreme Court, that they decide to, actually uphold their jobs, regardless of, political affiliation. So I don't think this is a political problem or a voting problem with the whole Trump being off the ballots. It's a constitutional problem.
Yeah, I kind of hear you on that. Yeah, it really is if you think about it.
I mean, that's my opinion, though.
Right. No, and I hear you on that, because I feel like that's what we're supposed to be upholding here. So if it turns out he's 100% guilty of this, then I think the necessary actions should be held up. Because otherwise, if we, let it slip just because, the followers are, crying about it, then what's that mean? What is the law?
All right, but hold on. Let me ask you a question. What does the Supreme Court say about rebellion or insurrection? How is it defined?
Are we talking like Webster's dictionary definition, or?
No, like the Supreme Court opinions are based off of precedent, and because the Constitution can say rebellion or insurrection, but that can mean different things in different contexts. And we don't really know what rebellion or insurrection means in this particular context. So there are, some, I guess, Supreme Court, or maybe not Supreme Court, but definitely court cases where the 14th Amendment has been invoked. But we don't really know whether this rises to that level or fits within that definition, or whether the Supreme Court would agree with that definition. But there's also another consideration, and that's enforceability. So it's up to each state to run its own elections. They have to run it according to the Constitution. They can't deviate from the framework established by the Constitution, but they're pretty much able to select, leaders how they want, and to send, delegates to vote for president, as long as it's a fair process and doesn't violate the Constitution. States have a lot of leeway to do that. So what is considered rebellion or insurrection, the Supreme Court may say, well, that could be up to states to decide individually, or they could apply a blanket definition across the board at the federal level. We don't know the answer to that question just yet.
That's a good point.
All right. I'm thinking here, since he's not officially charged with being, with the insurrection, that it's still up to be questionable. But I feel with this specific case, it's more of what they intended to do originally versus the interpretation of. Because at that point there was no precedent, like you said. There was no precedent where an elected leader of this country, which prides itself on its open and free democracy for voting for your leaders, that a leader that was defeated in the voting decided to turn around and be like, no, I didn't lose, with no evidence that, anything was rigged or put in his favor.
Right.
We'll ignore the fact that the Republicans have been gerrymandering their districts so they could stay in power for years, decades even. We'll just ignore that for now and just go along with the original lines were when they made the Constitution and this, whole deal of electing. Yeah, I agree with you that, the states run their own voting for who they're voting for. But at this point, he would be considered I guess you would say federal because it deals with the whole country, a federal criminal, a traitor to the country.
Right.
What the country was supposed to represent. And I think one of the biggest problems with the United States itself is it really doesn't have its own identity, because it's a group of people coming together under a common set of laws meant to benefit all instead of one. And in the end game, it's been manipulated and smeared and kind of
state run.
Well, not just state run. It's just like the whole, from when we originally put the rules in this country that we follow to this day, whether it's the Constitution and all the laws they had to get together to, charge people with crimes and murders and stuff like that, to where we are today. I would say as a society, we're more civil, because had this happened, I'd say like the third presidency, I think he would have been hung as opposed to, allowed to walk around and say what he wants to say on Twitter.
Well, the 14th Amendment was written after the Civil War. It was one of the Civil War amendments. And so they had rebellion and insurrection in mind. These southern states seceded and fought a war against the United States of America. And this amendment was very clear in its intent to prevent former Confederates from holding public office unless, and there's a caveat, it says that I think by 2/3 vote, Congress can remove disqualification. So, if you're rebelling against the United States, you can run for office if Congress says it's okay. But so there's definitely a post-Civil War intent with respect to the entirety of the 14th Amendment. But with regard to this clause, there is a specific intent, perhaps, to not allow former Confederates to hold office, because obviously we just fought these people. We wouldn't want them to have that kind of power as the president of the United States or whatnot, or vice president even, because back then vice president was a completely separate election. The president didn't choose a running mate. Whoever came in second got to be vice president under the original Constitution.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess the other thing that I would also attach to this whole conversation is that, I don't know if you guys had heard, and I guess I don't know if it was a tweet that Trump put out or if it was something, I think he was being interviewed, but he says something about if he does win the first day, he plans on being a dictator, just the first day. Now,
yeah, that sounds like a joke.
That sounds just like stupid, though. Like, why would you say that? Because, like, honestly, I don't listen or believe anything that comes out of his mouth.
Because he's an asshole and likes to fool around. He's not a serious person. So.
Right. But, like, he's going for a very serious role. You know what I mean? So it's like, that's kind of stupid.
We know he's not serious already. Like, this is
just like his healthcare plan. Remember?
This is not new. This is not new. He's not a serious person.
Right. But that's all the more reason why I feel like that, like somebody like in that stature should never hold office for this country. You know what I mean? Like ever. It's like, this is not, The Apprentice. This is not a TV
Well,
show.
we fucked up the first time.
Big time.
Hopefully there will not be another time.
Right. That's what I'm saying. But you know what I mean? Because like we were saying before, I would rather him completely be out of the picture, but not like in a devious way. Like if he committed wrongdoings, which it clearly seems to be the case, then yes, we got to uphold the law. We got to uphold the Constitution like we should. You know what I mean? But if you're going to like let him bend and weave around this, and hopefully the general population smart enough to, vote against this, then it shouldn't be a problem regardless. But I mean, I'm just a little more focused on the future of this situation, because I feel like as easily as this has already just came up, it just seems like any billionaire or millionaire could probably pull this exact same situation off, but say that person is smarter than Trump. You know what I mean? Because that could be the end of democracy as we know it. Like if he wins, even if you think about that. And what I meant before too, when we were talking about like the governing of the country, and then remember, I think I slipped in there and said state. Sometimes it does feel like there is general laws throughout the entire land here, but then I feel like there is like a little microscope in each of these states, kind of, or not necessarily their own country per se, because we're all in the United States, but things are very different in which state you live in. So that's another thing to pay close attention to, because like even that Roe v. Wade being overturned, blue states, it is not really that much of a difference. But if you live in a red state, you can't get an abortion. You can't get contraceptives. You know what I mean? So it's weird how that works right now. So like certain states you can do things and other states you can't.
Yeah, that's called federalism. It's a system of government that was set up in the Constitution to give the federal government, the national government, certain powers, and then the state government has its own powers. And then there are some shared powers between state and federal government. And for example, with respect to immigration or international affairs, national security, things like that, the federal government power is at its strongest, and it can make laws that exclusively in that domain. Whereas states can also make laws, but only ones that don't counteract the federal law. There are also some things that states can do that the federal government can't do. And so there's this sort of tug and pull with respect to state power and federal power. And then there's a lot of overlapping area where both can legislate, and, courts, federal courts, and eventually the Supreme Court will decide whether or not the states are, have the exclusive power, or whether their exercise of power rather, counteracts any federal prerogative. Just recently, there's an example of this in Texas, I believe. They made a law that punishes illegal immigration, that criminalizes crossing the border illegally. Now, it's one thing to make laws within the state about illegal immigrants that are already there within the state. Yeah, it does involve some federal law and regulation, but thus far, states have not really tried to interfere with what is thus far been the exclusive jurisdiction of the federal government, which is the actual crossing into the territory of the United States by someone from outside the United States. That has, for the history of our Constitution, been the clear sole discretion of the federal government, and states can't really do anything that is at odds with that. In Texas, the governor basically said, you know what? we're going to criminalize people crossing over, not just, kicking them out or making life hard for them. We are going to, when they cross, that's a crime in and of itself. And curious to see what the Supreme Court's going to say about that, because that is clearly at odds with all the precedent we've had in terms of federal power on the issue of immigration.
Considering the Supreme Court where it stands now, I got a feeling they might not be all against that. I'll leave it there, but
well, I think so. This is maybe one of the issues that the court might not be so, because we're talking about federal power here, and the trend, whether it's been a more liberal court or a more conservative court, there's a trend toward giving or recognizing the power of the federal government. Yeah, there's been some states' rights proponents that have been successful, but by and large, the trajectory of our legal system has been to favor federal power. And so I'd be very surprised when it's a question of whether or not a power that has been recognized as the exclusive jurisdiction of the federal government, I'd be shocked if even this court would say, you know what, we're going to overturn, over 200 years of precedent and say, you know what, states can do whatever they want with regard to criminalizing immigration. I'd be surprised, because the law has been very, very clear on this issue for a very long time.
So you don't see it?
You've seen them overturn Roe v. Wade, as you said, and also parts of the Voting Rights Act. But I would say that those are more individual rights issues as opposed to issues of federalism and the powers that belong to states and the federal government, and that balance between them. I would be shocked if this court were willing to upturn any of those long-standing precedents.
And that's all for this week. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and hit the bell icon for notifications. Strange Planet will have new episodes on YouTube every Friday. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next week.